Today's passage is Genesis 35, 23, 29. Let's read together. The sons of Leah, Reuben the firstborn of Jacob, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Rachel's servant Bilhah, Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Leah's servant Zilpah, Gad and Asher. These were the sons of Jacob, who were born to him in Paddan Aram. Jacob came home to his father Isaac in Mamre, near Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. Isaac lived 180 years. Then he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people old and full of years. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. Amen. I will share a message with you today titled, The Sons of Jacob and the Death of Isaac, the Covenant Fulfilled. The Bible is written in various styles. Some parts read like a novel, with characters, dialogue, and action. Other parts are written like news articles, objectively reporting and describing events as if a reporter were on the scene. Today's passage is one such section, written objectively like a news report. Verses 23 to 26 list the names of Jacob's sons, and verses 27 to 29 describe Isaac's funeral, simply reporting the facts. The content of this report is the fulfillment of God's covenant. While the names of Jacob's sons are listed and Isaac's death is recorded, the core message is how God's covenant is being brought to fruition. God made a twofold promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. First, he promised them descendants, that he would make their descendants prosper. Second, he promised them land, that he would give the land of Canaan to their descendants. The first section of today's passage is about descendants. God promised to make Abraham's descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. But think about it. How was this promise fulfilled? And when was it fulfilled? This promise was not fulfilled right away. Abraham lived without a son until he was 100 years old and had only Isaac in his old age. The same was true for Isaac. The Bible does not report that he had any children other than the twins, Esau and Jacob. In short, they belonged to a family where descendants were precious and few. But with Jacob everything changes. Through deception by his uncle Laban, Jacob ends up with 4 wives. Now, imagine for a moment that Jacob had not been deceived. If he had married only Rachel, the woman he loved, from the start, how many sons would he have had? He would have had exactly 2, yet it was through this deception that he drew closer to the fulfillment of God's promise. This is how history unfolds within God's will. We see that God leads and guides the life of every person in a truly amazing way. From Jacob's wives 12 sons are born, and these 12 become the forefathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. Later, the tribe of Levi would be set apart for priestly duties, and Joseph's portion would be given to his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, thus preserving the number of 12 tribes. So, we can see that the framework for the 12 tribes of Israel began right here, with Jacob's sons. This genealogy is recorded in just 4 short verses for now, but from this point on, the number of descendants begins to increase exponentially by God's hand. The total number of Jacob's family members who went down to Egypt was about 70, yet 400 years later at the time of the Exodus, the Israelites had grown to about 600,000 adult men, including women and children. Scholars estimate the total population was likely at least 2 million. Another important place in the Old Testament where we find this report-style genealogy is the Book of Chronicles. The names of the sons, which take up just 4 verses in our passage today, are expanded to fill the first 9 chapters of 1 Chronicles. That is the extent to which the names of Abraham's and Jacob's descendants are recorded. So 4 verses become 9 chapters. This is how God blesses. God's promise is fulfilled in this way. When God gives a promise, it is not always fulfilled right away. Often a period of maturation, a time of waiting, is necessary. It's not that the accomplishment of the promise is unimportant, but rather that God is not limited by time. He could create millions of people in an instant if he chose. Therefore, what is more important than the timing of the fulfillment is the process itself. It is through this process that we come to know God more deeply and that our relationship with him is strengthened. In the waiting, we learn and realize, this is who God is. This is how he works. During this time, we encounter God on a more profound level. Perhaps the time given to us now is just such a time of waiting. According to our own timetable, we might feel anxious, but this is a time to believe and wait, trusting that God's timetable is always perfect. Trusting in God's timing is more important than the accomplishment of any single task. It is in the waiting that we learn this trust, this complete reliance on God. The story that follows can also be interpreted in this same light. From verse 27, The story of Isaac's death and funeral is briefly reported. Verse 28 records that Isaac was called home by God at the age of 180, and verse 29 records that Esau and Jacob buried him. What is important here is the location. Just as Jacob did not follow Esau to Seir, it seems Isaac did not live with Esau either. It appears Esau had already moved away to live on his own. The place where Isaac was living is recorded in verse 27. Let's read verse 27 together. Jacob came home to his father Isaac in Mamre, near Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. Amen. Jacob came to his father Isaac in Mamre, near Kiriath Arba, which later became known as Hebron. This is a place familiar to us from the biblical narrative. This is the very land that was purchased from the local residents to bury Sarah when she died. Abraham bought the cave of Machpelah near Mamre from Ephron the Hittite, paying the full price of 400 shekels of silver. He paid a very high price for it at the time, but Abraham does not haggle. He pays the full asking price, likely more than the market value, to purchase the land outright. He does this to prevent any future disputes. As a foreigner purchasing land, he knew that disagreements could easily arise later. People saying things like, well, the price was fair then, but land is worth more now. To prevent any such dispute, Abraham pays the high price without haggling, and it is here, in the cave of Machpelah, that Abraham himself was buried. Now, in today's passage, we read that Isaac was also buried in that very same place by his sons, Esau and Jacob. If the preceding section relates to the promise of descendants, the section on Isaac's death has an important meaning related to the land. Just as the promise of descendants required waiting, so did the promise of the land. God promised to give them the land of Canaan, but the only land Abraham ever owned was this single plot, the small piece of ground he bought for Sarah's tomb. The same was true for Isaac. The only land he possessed was the family tomb his father had passed down to him. God showed him the vast land and promised it to him and his descendants, but that promise was not fulfilled immediately. Just like the promise of descendants, it would only be fulfilled hundreds of years later, when the Israelites entered the land under the leadership of Joshua. Beloved saints, this is what faith is. Faith is waiting. The word faith and the word waiting are nearly synonyms. Faith sometimes requires hundreds of years of waiting. When we say we live by faith, we must be prepared to live this kind of life. Even if the promise does not unfold before our eyes, even if God does not grant us what He promised right away, our belief is not contingent on receiving the promise or seeing things work out. We believe in God simply because He is God and because He will one day surely fulfill what He has spoken. This is the life of faith, a person who can count the stars in the sky by looking at one Isaac, a person who can embrace the entire land of Canaan by looking at the small plot of the cave of Machpelah. These are people of faith. At times we may face frustrating situations with no apparent answers. Some of you are praying for the salvation of family members who will not open their hearts, asking, Lord, how long must I pray? Others are offering prayers for financial problems or the healing of illnesses. Still others are lifting up prayers for the resolution of unhealed wounds and relationship problems. Unlike our impatient hearts that want a quick answer, God can seem very unhurried, but our God is one who surely fulfills what He has promised. He is so faithful that even after hundreds of years, He does not forget but brings His promise to pass. Our time of waiting may feel like hundreds of years, but to God, it can be like a day, like a moment. And that time of waiting is also absolutely necessary for us. For a single life to be conceived and born, a waiting period of 9 months is needed. During that time we prepare for the child and prepare ourselves to become parents. For a single fruit to be born, there must be a time for a sprout to bud, a flower to bloom, and the patience to endure the scorching midsummer sun. This is how fruit ripens. We are now in this time of waiting, and though the answer may seem to come slowly, what is certain is that we are heading toward it. We are one day closer to the answer today than we were yesterday, and we will be one day closer tomorrow than we are today. This is certain because our God is a God who always answers. I bless you in the Lord's name to live without losing faith that you are heading toward the answer, even in the midst of the wait. I pray that you may dream of counting the stars in the sky while looking at one Isaac. I pray that you may embrace all the nations and peoples of the world while looking at that small piece of land, the cave of Machpelah. I bless you in the Lord's name to live a faithful life, remembering the promise God has given, enduring and waiting in faith.